Good morning and welcome to the 31st meeting of the Health and Sport Committee in 2022. In 2020, we have received apologies this morning from Alex Cole-Hamilton. I would ask all members to ensure that mobile phones are on silent and other notifications are turned off during the meeting, and I would ask other participants. First item on our agenda today is subordinate legislation, consideration of a made affirmative instrument. As in previous weeks, these regulations relate to coronavirus and international travel and are laid under Section 94(1), International Travel of the Public Health, etc. Scotland Act 2008. Section 1225 of that Act states that regulations under this section are subject to the affirmative procedure. However, provision is made that ministers can make those regulations urgently, in which case Section 1227 applies. That sets out that emergency regulations must be laid before the Scottish Parliament and cease to have effect on the expiry of the period of 28 days, beginning on the first day of the reg being made, unless the regulations are first approved by Parliament. That falls to us as the Health and Sport Committee to consider the instrument and report to Parliament accordingly, and we are today looking at the Health Protection Coronavirus International Travel Scotland Amendment number 23 regulations of 2020, which relate to the addition or removal of various countries and territories to or from the exemption list. And I welcome once again to the committee Hamza Yousaf, Cabinet Secretary for Justice, who is accompanied by Anita Popplestone from the Police Division, Craig Thompson, Border Measures Review Team Leader, and James Boyce, Unit Head, Health Performance and Delivery. Thank you for joining us today. Cabinet Secretary, I don't know if you want to say some introductory remarks in relation to these listens. Cabinet Secretary.
Good morning, Convener. As always, I hope you and the committee are all doing well. These are the number 23 amendment regulations, as you have mentioned. They remove Greece, other than the islands of Rhodes, Kos, Corfu, Crete, and Zakynthos, up from the list of exempt countries, territories, or parts of countries or territories. They also remove the sovereign base areas of Akrotiri, Dekelia, and Cyprus from the list of exempt United Kingdom overseas territories. What they do is they add Bahrain, Cambodia, Chile, Iceland, Laos, Qatar, and the United Arab Emirates to the list of exempt countries or territories, or parts of countries or territories, known as Schedule A1 Part 1, also adding the Turks and Caicos Islands to the list of exempt United Kingdom overseas territories. So that is the regulations. Of course, I'm more than happy, as always, Convener, to take questions.
Thank you very much. I'll perhaps start, and I'd encourage any colleagues who have questions for the Cabinet Secretary before we move to the formal debate to put an R in the request to speak box just now in order to indicate that. We heard this morning of plans that have been approved in relation to travellers returning or entering airports in England, which will effectively enable the period of quarantine to be reduced from 14 days, where it currently applies, to a much shorter time, perhaps 5 days, I think, and then following a test, 1 or 2 days for the test result, and if it's negative, that would then end the quarantine period. And the comment that was made this morning was that the devolved administrations were considering what action to take in relation to similar proposals. So I wonder, Cabinet Secretary, if you would take this opportunity briefly to update us on your consideration of such a step. Cabinet Secretary.
Happy to do so, Convener. Last week when I appeared in front of you, I alluded to the fact that there was likely to be an announcement in the coming days, and there has been, as you say, today, an announcement by the UK Government. On the positives, the engagement has been constructive with the UK Government. They have engaged with my officials, engaged with me as a ministerial colleague, and we discussed this at our last COVID-0 meeting. Where I am is in a very similar position to my colleagues in Wales, and I think Northern Ireland as well, but certainly Wales expressed the same views as the Scottish Government. And my position, not too dissimilar to what I said last week, is that I definitely think there's merit in looking at the test and release system, proposal by the UK Government. There's certainly merit in that. My concern, and I've spoken, as you can imagine, to our CMO about this, and he shares the concerns. Our concerns are a fewfold. One is, do we understand and do we have detail about the efficacy of the proposal? Where's the evidence basis? So we don't have the evidential basis for the test and release proposal yet. So we asked for that on last week when we were told about this proposal from the UK government. So first thing is, can we get the evidence base that underpins the proposal? My officials may be able to update if we've received that yet, but I certainly haven't seen the evidential basis yet. We're waiting for that. This is the first issue. The second issue is that the testing would rely on private sector capacity so as not to use up NHS capacity. I think that's right. But what we have to do from a Scottish perspective is ensure that we have that private sector capacity available. That's the second point. And the third question, again, which I think I alluded to last week, is the question of timing. The UK government's proposals would come into place around about the 15th of December, 15th, 16th of December. Excuse me. Question we have to ask is that a suitable time to test a pilot? This is a pilot, hasn't been done before in the UK. It could have some teething problems. Is the best time to test that when you're likely to have, albeit a modest uplift, but yet an uplift in numbers during the peak travel period? Or are we better to test a system like this when it's off-peak? And that's a question we're considering at the moment. So I hope that answers the question. As I say, the UK or the system won't come into place in England, I think, until the middle of December. So we have some time to work through these issues.
Thank you very much, and yes, that's helpful. I think you used the word pilot, but my understanding is that the intention this will apply to all travellers arriving in England at airports or at seaports in England. So pilot perhaps in a technical sense, but actually on a much larger scale than we would be operating. So presumably the conversations around the infrastructure and the mechanics for making that happen, I hope you're able to, while I understand you're waiting for some evidence on the public health side, presumably some of the infrastructure issues are ones you and your officials have been considering for some time. Yes, absolutely. And there's engagement with there's engagement with the airports in particular, and the airlines, of course, but the airports, and don't know if they have put out their public comment, but certainly when they were telling us about the media requests that they were receiving on this, they were certainly going to point to a positive and constructive engagement. I think from the airport perspective, they'll obviously clearly be pushing us around not being at a competitive disadvantage, and I can understand that point, and my colleague Michael Matheson will of course be engaged in that discussion. But yeah, your points are well made. In relation to the evidential basis, Cabinet Secretary, I understand you're waiting for some further information from the UK government on that. Again, I suppose there would be a general view that the general scientific and medical advice which is received by you and your colleagues in the Scottish Government will not be different in essence from the advice received by the UK Government, although it may differ in detail. Is there any fundamental problem from the point of view of the Scottish Government in proceeding with this, assuming the detailed advice is compatible with your own analysis of the situation? So there certainly isn't an in-principle objection. I think if we can align with others across the UK on a test and release basis, we would want to do that. So it's certainly not an ideological or in-principle objection. It really is based on the logistics and the clinical advice. And when I talk about clinical advice, it's also about the efficacy of what we're doing. So there are rightly, and of course your committee led by you and convened by you, convener, has been probing questions about compliance around the 14-day self-isolation period. And I've been very upfront about the fact that, yes, while there are spot checks done by Public Health Scotland, while there is follow-up by Police Scotland, there's no doubt there's questions about how well the 14-day period isolation is being complied with. And the question is, although 14-day self-isolation is the most effective measure, the question is, if there was a shorter period, would more people be likely to comply with that shorter period, and therefore that be an effective measure? And that's what the UK government's argument is, and I think there's some sound logic to it.
what we're asking for is, will show us just the evidence base. So it's not just clinical, it's about behavioural psychology and so on and so forth. Can you show us that evidence base? Because actually, if your evidence does show you that, I can absolutely see the logic of moving ahead with the test and release proposal.
Thank you very much, Cabinet Secretary. I have questions from Donald Cameron and then Emma Harper. Donald Cameron.
Thank you, Convener. Cabinet Secretary, just on the same topic, would it be your ambition to mirror what is happening in the rest of the UK? If you are satisfied, would you see the sense of applying the same regime across the 4 nations of the United Kingdom?
Cabinet Secretary.
So, short answer, yes. I should say it's not happening in the rest of the UK. At the moment, it's happening in England. I know Wales have similar concerns. Northern Ireland, I couldn't quite state their position. They were still to take a view. But certainly, in principle, it would make absolute sense, I think, for 4 nations alignment and preferably at the same time, if we can. But you'll understand, and I know you will understand, that we've also got to be guided by our clinicians and the clinical advice that we receive.
Thank you for that. Thank you, Convener. I've got a rather technical question on the regulations that you're moving today, which is about the sovereign bases in Cyprus. Could you just give a bit of explanation as to, because I think I'm right in saying that Cyprus was removed from the exempt list at the start of November, and the military bases effectively were kept out of that, but they are now being also removed from the exempt list. Can you just flesh that out a bit for us?
Cabinet Secretary.
I can, and there was a lot of interesting discussion about this. As you say, they are sovereign bases, so they're not included when Cyprus was removed. Of course, you'll know about British military interest and assistance in Cyprus over the years, and there was just a question about whether or not including Akrotiri and Dekalea in the exemption, would it cause any problems to the MOD? That was why they were not removed in the first instance, but when the MOD were able to confirm that removing the sovereign bases would not cause them any issue, the decision was made just to frankly make it a lot neater to remove the sovereign bases. And actually, to be honest, it doesn't make much of a difference anyway well, certainly to Scotland, but we were very conscious that we didn't want Scotland to make one decision that might impact the MOD or armed personnel in other parts of the UK. So once we got that sign-off from the MOD, we were more than comfortable to remove the sovereign bases. So it was really just really waiting for the MOD's approval in that regard.
Thank you very much. Emma Harper. Just a moment, Emma, until your sound is connected. There we are. Carry on.
Oh, thank you. Sorry. Good morning, Convener, and good morning, Cabinet Secretary. I'm just looking at the UK Government's website for this testing strategy for international arrivals. It says that the cost will be basically provided for the traveller. So the traveller picks up the cost for this, and that all testing will be done by private labs, although these labs will be approved by the UK Government. I'm just interested in maybe a couple of words around that, but I'm also interested in just continuing to pursue whatever we do needs to be evidence-based and driven by the fact that we need to protect people's lives and use evidence to inform decisions that are made.
Cabinet Secretary.
So just in short, there's agreement across the 4 nations. I don't think I'd be speaking out of turn at all to say that we all believe that the cost of the test and release system should be borne by the traveller. Or, if there's some kind of arrangement with the private sector, then fine. But I suppose the essence of it is that it shouldn't infringe or impact in any way the NHS testing capacity. There just isn't a good justification for using NHS testing capacity, although we might have that capacity, but using that capacity for people going for some winter sun, for example, to the Canary Islands. So we just we're all aligned on that basis. That's why it's really important from a Scottish perspective, and we're doing this work logistically, looking at whether or not we have sufficient private sector capacity here in Scotland. So that's ongoing, and there's nothing really for me to add on the evidence base other than to say, just reiterate what I've already said, that we are keen to move on a four nations basis. I think there's a lot of sense in that, but we just need a little bit more understanding for the evidence base in the proposal. I'm sure it will be coming, and I'd also like to, as you'd imagine, continue to take views from our own Chief Medical Officer, particularly around the timing. I do think there'll probably only be a modest uplift from what I'm told by my transport colleagues in Transport Scotland and their engagement with airlines. They only expect a modest uplift in passengers travelling this winter. So the timing issue may become a little bit more moot, but I still want to make sure we're exploring all those issues.
Thank you very much. Emma. Emma's completed her questions, and there are no other members wishing questions, so we will now move to agenda item 2, which is the formal debate on the Made Affirmative Instrument, on which we have just heard from the Cabinet Secretary. I remind members and others that this is a formal debate. The officials will not be taking part in the debate, and nor will there be questions put to the Cabinet Secretary. But of course, if members wish to contribute to the debate, they are more than welcome to do so. Can I, in the meantime, invite the Cabinet Secretary to move the motion S5M 23365. Cabinet Secretary.
Convener, happy to move and wish to move the motion S5M 23365 in my name.
Thank you very much. Can I ask if any members wish to contribute to debate on this motion? If there are no members who wish to contribute to the debate and the Cabinet Secretary has nothing further to add, then we will move to put the question. The question is that motion S5M 23365 be approved. Are we all agreed? We are all agreed. Thank you very much. And we will report to Parliament accordingly. Can I thank the Cabinet Secretary and his officials for their attendance this morning? And we will now move on to the next item of business on our agenda. The next item is again consideration of subordinate legislation, this time a negative instrument, the Food and Feed EU Exit Amendment Regulations 2020. Members will note that in the briefing paper provided, it was suggested that we wish to explore how the new functions conferred by this SSI on Food Standards Scotland will work in practice, particularly those in relation to third countries, and also to ask what will replace some of the powers which currently exist, which are being revoked by these regulations. So those are the suggestions in the paper, either that we write to them write to the Scottish Government to make those inquiries, either while agreeing to make no recommendations today, or we could await the Government's answer and consider further at our next. I see Sandra White.
Thank you, Convener. And yes, I've read through the paper and agree with the recommendations. There's a couple of things I wanted to raise. Paragraph 6 and paragraph 8. The Delegated Powers and Law Reform Committee are looking at this today, so we don't have their answer if there's anything to raise. And it mentioned the fact that if we pass this today, and there is anything raised by the Delegated Powers Committee, Law Reform Committee, then it can come back to this committee. So I wanted to ask a wee bit of clarification. If it does go ahead, and then the Delegated Powers and Law Reform Committee actually raises concerns regarding it, how does that work in legislative process if we've already said we agree?
It's not a problem in the sense that the DPLR's role is to consider technically the compliance and so on of the committee, of the regulation. Clearly, it would be a problem if the issues they raised called into question the substance of the motion of the regulation itself. I think the paper does not suggest there is anything fundamentally at risk in passing this regulation. But it does raise technical points. It is, of course, open to us and perhaps in response to Sandra White's suggestion, we could contact the Scottish Government today with the questions we want answers to in any case, and postpone a final decision on this instrument until after we've heard both from the Government and from the DPLR committee. I'm certainly relaxed about that. We don't have to sign off this regulation today. We can do it at some time. Any of our next couple of meetings will be soon enough because it relates to changes that will come into force in due course and not immediately. Emma Harper.
Thanks, Convener. Just picking up on the paper, it says that the statutory instruments confer new functions on Food Standards Scotland and local authorities, and there's a list of new functions. And if we're going to assign new functions to Food Standards Scotland, do we need to be concerned about resourcing issues, enough staff to cover what these new functions will be? Is this just to be another burden on Food Standards Scotland, which we didn't have before exiting the EU?
It's a very fair question, and I think, again, if we agree that we should, what the paper suggests is that the new powers in relation to third countries, we would want to know how that will work in practice, given that clearly Food Standards Scotland does not operate in third countries. And so we could add to that question the question of whether Food Standards Scotland and local authorities will be resourced to deal with the new powers which are conferred on them by this regulation. And again, if we got that answer in time for our next meeting or the meeting thereafter, we could make a decision on the instrument once we know the answer to the question. If that makes sense. Yep. Fine. I think that's then, if members are agreed, that's what we will do. We will write to the Scottish Government. We will ask why the regulation, or what the intention is in removing the regulatory power for where a third country may have caused concern, how that power is to be replaced as it's being revoked today. And we will ask the question that Sandra White asked, in relation to the concerns that may or may not come from the DPLR committee, and also the issues that Emma Harper raised in relation to the resources available to the Food Standards Scotland and local authorities. And finally, ask about how in practice Food Standards Scotland responsibilities in third countries will be carried out. And with all of that information, we should be in a position to consider this instrument again at a future meeting. We have to clear it essentially before Christmas is the timetable we're working to, so it does not have to be dealt with today. Are we all agreed that we should take that approach? That is agreed. Thank you very much. We now move on to the fourth item on our agenda, a roundtable session as part of our social care inquiry. Today we are hearing from people with a prominent role in the delivery or commissioning of care, and I welcome to the committee Joanna MacDonald, Chief Officer, Argyll and Bute Health and Social Care Partnership and Chair of Social Work Scotland Adult Social Care Committee, Viv Dickinson, Chief Executive Officer of Crossreach, and Cassie Hersey, Manager of Isleview Nursing Home in Altbay. Welcome to all of you to the committee, and can I ask you in that order, to invite each of you to introduce yourself to the committee and say in a word or two about the areas which you hope to address today. Starting with Joanna MacDonald.
Good morning, and I'm really pleased to be here this morning. So I'm Chief Officer in Argyll and Bute, which has got 23 inhabited islands, very remote and rural, and really been an absolute privilege, particularly over the last 8 months, to see the work that's been going on across health and social care, and particularly around adult social care. So I'm really pleased to be part of the discussion this morning. In relation to my role as Chair of Social Work Scotland's Adult Social Care Committee, we, as many groups did, went virtual with our meetings in the spring when COVID was pending, and have been meeting monthly. and actually have had more engagement because of that virtual approach across the whole of Scotland, again with particularly our islands and people not having to travel. And I would have to say, and I'll mention this in discussion, it's been a really important forum for people from different local authorities, mental health, learning disability, physical disability backgrounds, as well as touching on community justice and adult social care and how we support people who've got ageing and who are also offending. And that monthly meeting has become invaluable, and we'll be continuing with that post-COVID. We've got an average of about 20 to 25 local authority that attend the meeting, and it really has been invaluable with some of the quite wicked issues, particularly earlier on in the pandemic, and more so about looking to the future and what adult social care can provide. So delighted to be here.
Thank you very much. And Viv Dickinson.
Good morning again. Really pleased to be here with you this morning. Representing Crossreach, I'm the Chief Executive Officer, and Crossreach is one of the largest and most diverse voluntary sector care providers in Scotland. We've been around for about 150 years, and we support people with a range of challenges, abilities and disabilities to live as normal a life as possible. Our work in adult care spans homelessness, criminal justice, learning disability, addictions, mental health, dementia and older age. We also provide children's services and work with people in transition between children's and adult services. Although much of our work is commissioned, complementing the statutory provision, we also have a lot of charitable work going on, which focuses on early intervention and prevention. We employ around 1,700 staff, mobilise around 300 volunteers and provide support to over 11,000 people annually. And delighted just to explore some of these tricky issues that Joanna was talking about today with you, both in terms of service commissioning, staffing, but principally about supported people who should be at the heart of this.
Thank you very much. And Cassie Hersey. Oh, we're not quite hearing.
Okay, you hear me now?
Yep, hearing you perfectly. Yep.
Okay, I manage a 25-bed nursing home as opposed to a care home in the remoter area of the North West Highlands. Hopefully I'm representing the views of many of the other nursing home managers in the region. Our nursing home is probably slightly different in that we take people with dementia, we also take people in need of palliative care and serve the local community given our remoteness and the inaccessibility of resources to us. I think my role or my contribution today will be mainly around the response to the COVID pandemic and how it's impacted on our work and what the future now is going to be for health and social care and going forward post-COVID. I'm delighted to join in.
Excellent, thank you very much, and it's great to have you all here. We have heard from users of services, and we are keen to make sure their voices are heard in whatever decisions government takes forward, but we're very keen to ensure that your voices are heard too. As I indicated earlier, I would encourage both members of the committee and witnesses to put an R in the chat box when you want me to call you. I'm going to start by asking Emma Harper to kick us off in the area of self-directed support, and then after Emma and after witnesses have responded to Emma's line of inquiry, I'll come to David Stewart. Emma Harper.
Thanks, Convener. Good morning to everybody. I'm interested in self-directed support because we heard last week about how it can be applied differently, and I am interested to know about how different local authorities implement self-directed support. And we heard that it can be quite popular, it can be understood as a route that should enable people to be involved in their decisions about their care. And Jim Aitken gave us evidence last week that basically said self-directed support was a postcode lottery, using it, I think, as a negative terminology. But like I live in a rural area, but there's obviously urban self-directed support that might need different approaches. So I'm wondering if you can give me some examples of how you feel self-directed support is or isn't working. And for me, for instance, a postcode lottery might actually be a good thing because it allows local authorities to determine the best approach for self-directed support in particular areas, specifically like across rural regions.
Thank you very much. Joanna MacDonald.
Thank you for that question. So I think it is fair to say that self-directed support is delivered differently across Scotland, and that reflects the different services and opportunities that there are, which vary greatly in urban areas in comparison to rural areas. I'd share there's a big piece of work going on at the moment, the self-directed support and consistency work that is being hosted by Social Work Scotland on behalf of the Scottish Government. And this work was presented to COSLA a couple of weeks ago, and it's looking at how we really standardise the principles of self-directed support, which are all about rights, respect, relationships, recognition and empowering individuals. And from my perspective, I think the original legislation articulates that very clearly, but we've had a challenge in really embedding that across the whole of Scotland. So the Self-Directed Support and Consistency Group has got a key role around a set of standards that have been discussed with chief officers, they've been discussed with COSLA, they're going to be going back to COSLA, and also will help to inform the review of adult social care. I think one of the areas that is really quite challenging when we look at consistency of service delivery is around funding and different local authority funding, and that is starting to become a concern as we're all starting to work on our budgets for next year, around how we fund the services in a really preventative, proactive way, when perhaps there isn't the level of funding there that would enable us to do that. But going back to the self-directed support legislation, I think the principles of that around really working with individuals, good old-fashioned social work about developing relationships, understanding what's important to them, what matters to them, as well as what is the matter with them, I think is really important work that's progressing. And the spotlight that's been shone on adult social care during COVID, I think is really welcome, because we're really seeing some of the really good innovation, but we need to see that across the whole of Scotland. So I think it's fair to say I'm always concerned about postcode lottery, but I think there are postcode variances at this moment.
Viv Dickinson.
Yes, our experience, we work from Shetland to Galashiels, is that it can be quite differently implemented in different parts of the country, but actually what is pretty standard is that it's not well implemented at all in terms of people having direct budgets and a control and choice over the types of services that they would like, or not services, the way in which they wish to live their life, and whoever they need round about them to support them. So this shouldn't all be about services, it should be about choice and control for individuals. And I think that's a tricky thing to get right when local authorities do have budgets and they do have standard commissioning practices. So I really welcome the work that Joanna's doing on the standardisation and implementation of self-directed support, because I think it's going to be really important for the future. I think one area that it's not terribly well implemented at all is in care of older people, and would be happy to talk a bit more about that. But certainly in other services, there's quite a range in the way that it has been implemented.
Thank you very much. Emma Harper.
Thank you, Convener. Thanks for your answers so far. In David Bell's submission, he talked about the vast majority of recipients of care and support is for elderly people, and so if we are talking about streamlining and some of these challenges of maybe bureaucratic processes, obviously the role of health and social care partnerships is really important in improving self-directed support. I guess the question would be to see how are we streamlining in a more expedited way. One of the witnesses last week said that the self-directed support meant he got his life and freedom back. So I would be interested to hear whether we want to continue to support more engagement with self-directed support and not necessarily have the local authorities control everything in a more, in a tight bureaucratic manner.
Thank you. I wonder which of our witnesses would like to answer that. I know, Viv, you said you might have a bit more to say about older people, but I'll maybe come to Joanna first and then come back to Viv. Joanna.
Yeah, for adult social care, most adult social care has been delegated to the HSCPs, which has enabled a lot of innovation. I think from my perspective, when we're really getting down into the nitty-gritty with self-directed support, there's still a bit of a lack of understanding, I think, from the public as well as others around what adult social care actually is. And I think it's important, as we all know, and the committee will know, that adult social care encompasses very complex personal care, including catheter and stoma care and management of medication and complex dementias and complex behavioural management. And that is all encompassed in the terminology adult social care. So I think at times that complexity can be a challenge when we're looking at person-centred care and looking at really, as Vivian mentioned, the maximising of choice, flexibility and control, which really underpins the legislation. I also think that, and we've seen this more so during COVID, but again it was an issue before, was managing carers' rights against the rights of the cared for person have been quite challenging, and they'll have different wishes and different views, and I think that that's a huge piece of work. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Viv.
I don't disagree. I think it's incredibly complicated to get this right, but I think the fundamental point is about education and people really understanding what adult social care is. It's about relationship building, and it's about supporting people to live as normally as possible. And I think in terms of older people, if I can just go back to that point, I think what happens is the family does as much as they can for as long as they can, and then something reaches a crisis, and it's not clear then the types of choices that even family have in that situation. And I can talk about this very personally, both as a provider of services, but also as an individual with a mum with dementia who has just been through quite a journey. And even for me, as somebody who knows all about this stuff, it was incredibly difficult to have these conversations about how you get an individual budget, or what choices you can support that person to make for the best for their own lives. So I think the public at large are not clear about the benefits of self-directed support, not clear about the conversations that they could be having, whether that's a supported person or somebody who is supporting them to make good choices for their lives. And I don't know quite how we crack that. I know Joanna's trying to, a group is working on the standards, but actually how do we work on the more fundamental point of education and understanding?
Thank you. Cassie.
Yeah, I just what Viv was saying there, most of my residents who are admitted to the nursing home actually come in on a crisis situation. It's very, very rare that anybody comes in a planned way. It's usually a crisis, it's usually an emergency, it's a request for immediate support, and we do everything possible to enable them to come in and calm things down a little bit. But it reflects what isn't happening in the community, that everything is becoming a crisis before people arrive. And it is about that information getting out there to the general public so that they know what to do at what stage, so that, we're not firefighting all the time.
Thank you very much. Emma.
Thanks, convener. Thanks, everybody. Just a final question. Obviously, Joanna, if you're working on adult social care services and looking at how do we roll out services, we'll be able to assess which local authorities are doing great as far as streamlining, making sure that people do have choices and the ability to, have their own package the way they want. So if we take the best practice in some areas, is that part of the role, is to then look at how do you share that best practice One example I heard yesterday was about social prescribing being presented to a local group in Dumfries and Galloway, and many people attending that meeting didn't know why they were even in the room learning about social prescribing, when actually that's something that, as a health and social care partnership, in order to present best practice, would be something that we would need to ensure that everybody is on board and actually knows what self-directed support can offer.
Joanna MacDonald.
Yes, I think that's a really good point. And as Cassie said, a number of people are coming into care homes at a point in crisis, which is really difficult for them and really difficult for their families as well, and something we want to prevent. Across Scotland, there are some fantastic examples, including in the borders, Dumfries and Galloway, Falkirk. We've got some in South Argyll and Bute, of people being able to access advice and guidance, not in a traditional social work office, but in community cafes or in community, even supermarkets, where they can drop in, have a cup of coffee, have a discussion, and not feel that they are being judged in any way. And there's huge benefits that have come out of that, because I do think at times budgets drive, perhaps even at the beginning of the assessment process, budgets, or the worry about budgets, drive what the potential outcome can be. And actually supporting carers in particular, and supporting organisations who do deliver care, is really important that they're able to see at the earliest opportunity where things aren't working so well and what support can they access. And basic things like getting the benefits maximised, making sure they've got access to funding. And as I said, I do think the profile has it's been really beneficial to have that during COVID, but there's a lot of work to do across Scotland, I think, for educating the public, but also probably re-educating our staff around self-directed support legislation in particular and what it intended doing.
Thank you very much. Now move to David Stewart.
Thank you, Convener, and good morning to our witnesses. I've got two main questions, one on consultation and one on care at home. The question on consultation is, how do we involve the public in the planning of our services and commissioning of services? I'm particularly interested in how we involve older people in planning of services.
Thank you very much. I wonder if we could start with Cassie on this occasion. Cassie, do you have a view on that?
Yeah, well, I suppose the answer is I don't know, much like nobody else seems to know. I think, again, it's about that community engagement, but it needs to start at a much earlier stage than it started, and almost before the social workers need to become involved. I think there's a huge piece of education needs to happen with nursing staff, care staff, doctors' surgeries, so that they're able to give out that information at a very early stage. I think waiting until somebody's, as I said before, at crisis point is not the time that they're able to absorb information. It's something that just needs to happen earlier.
Thank you very much. Viv, do you have a view on this one?
Well, I guess there are some models out there that you could pick on. So, for example, a few years ago, in terms of children's services, there's been a lot of work done in terms of consulting care experienced children in terms of the recent care review, but before that, the big blether run by the Children's Commissioner, trying to get children and young people to engage in issues that were fundamentally important to them about how they wanted to live their lives, and if they needed support, then how they should be supported. And I guess it's not too far a leap to take to see other models that we can pull on to engage with older people in that way. I guess one of the difficulties is there's not an older people's commissioner in the same way who's trying to pull together these conversations, but it sounds to me like we do need to have that debate very early on. And we should be very clear. I think older people are a bit frightened about talking about this sometimes because they think that inevitably the answer is going to be a care home. And I think care homes can enhance people's lives. And actually, Mum has gone into a care home in the last 18 months and is thriving actually now in the care home in a way that she wasn't in the community at the latter stages of her journey with dementia there. But actually terrified, I think, earlier on in that conversation, when you're talking about care and support, that is going to be the automatic answer, and at much an earlier point than they would like. So I think it's a careful conversation, but I do think it's a conversation that needs to be brokered by something like a commissioner, or in that way that Children's Services have kind of organically done that and had a real intention and focus on making sure that people's voices were heard.
Thanks. Joanna, anything to add on that?
I think our community councils and local elected members are pretty powerful advocates for their communities and older people in particular. And certainly we saw during COVID fantastic work involving their local intelligence around caring for people and the basics around people who were lonely, who were struggling to get their prescriptions, who were struggling to look after themselves. And in Argyll and Bute, absolutely so proud of the work with the third sector interface in particular, and how they harnessed all these resources across communities and worked with the council and the HSCP around caring for people to ensure that people had the most basic support. What we also found through that as well was an untapped resource around volunteering. And in Argyll and Bute, we've got a population of 86,000. We had over 1,000 people volunteering to participate in caring for people who fed back that this really enriched their lives. And I think the terminology older people as well, it's interesting when you speak with older people, they always think it's someone who's older than them. But we had a number of people in their 60s and 70s participating in really valuable, picking up prescriptions, popping in and popping to doorsteps at that point and seeing their neighbours, who've continued to develop these relationships. And certainly in Argyll and Bute, we're looking to see how can we continue and how can we expand on that, because for me, preventative services are about that initial contact and that connecting older people who can be quite isolated, particularly if they lose their loved one, and can be quite isolated in their own home. So I think there's loads of learning through COVID. I do think hearing the voice of older people, I've met with numerous lunch clubs of people, predominantly women in their 80s and 90s, who, when I'm talking about power of attorney, talking about their home, the majority see that as being, yes, when I need that. So they always see it as being something that's not the priority at the time. So I think it's a difficult one for us to really crack. But I do think, as I said at the beginning, community councils, elected members, third sector interface, or voluntary sector are out there. And as we saw through COVID, harnessing all of that information is really, really beneficial for older people.
Thank you. Cassie.
I would agree with what Joanna and Viv say, and that information sharing and disseminating it to the relevant people is important. But at the end of the day, I think it does come back to also having the resources available. I have people in my nursing home now who should not be there, but there are no resources available to them in the community to receive the type of support that they will benefit from. And my fear for them is that they're inappropriately placed, that there is nowhere else for them to go.
Yeah, I think that's one of the underlying concerns that we're keen to explore further. David Stewart.
Thank you, Convener. I think the witnesses have quite nicely brought me on to my final question. I'm quite interested in changing the mindset of care at home. So, for example, I've been working with a Shetland GP to introduce a policy of the right to die at home, which would involve, obviously, follow-on services, which are absolutely crucial. And Joanna MacDonald will be also familiar with the Fit Homes project in Highlands and her time there, which really involves sensor-based accommodation so that movement can be monitored, barrier-free sinks that could be dropped, accommodation that's got aids and adaptations. So if we get the home setting right, which does involve resources and perhaps a change in philosophy, will that not cover the point that Cassie made, that we might stop some inappropriate allocation or an inappropriate movement towards care homes? Care homes are very, very important. I do think there's an element of inappropriate. allocation of individuals to residential care when, frankly, they want to stay at their own home.
Indeed. Joanna MacDonald?
Yes, just to agree entirely. So that the housing can be the primary reason that someone has to move out of their house. The care is a huge element of the house as well, that just becomes somewhere they can't live. And there has been fantastic work across Scotland, and as Mr. Stewart mentioned there, in Highland as well. So, which I think is good in areas, but we haven't, again, got that whole system approach. We're doing work in Argyll and Bute at the moment, again, as I said, building on what worked well during COVID. And there's investment in housing in many parts of Scotland, and we've certainly got investment here in Argyll and Bute. And we're starting from the principle, we've got a housing, health and social care group established to inform what the design and the build of our new accommodation will look like, and in order that we can have accommodation that's fit for older people, the accommodation that's fit for our care experience young people when they move out of accommodation and into their first home can be a really difficult time for them, and really harnessing the experience and knowledge of OTs and of physios and of others who are the first to say when someone's moving into a care home, if we'd done things upstream, done things earlier, we could have prevented this. And as I said earlier on, it's such a really difficult decision for your loved one to go into a care home, as we know, and as Viv said, when they do move into a care home, they inevitably really enjoy it and are well cared for and are not lonely. They've got lots of social supports, but it is a big decision. And I think if people don't have to make that because the right care's in place and the right accommodations there, then that really does get underneath everything around human rights and supporting people to have choice.
Thank you very much. Cassie Hersey.
I mean, I do believe that nursing homes, care homes, we are almost the experts currently at the moment on dementia care. But there are many times when somebody with dementia, there is no reason for them to be in a nursing home. And there is perhaps some scope to be looked at whereby nursing homes could be supported or funded to provide more of an outreach service to enable community resources to manage what can be quite difficult behaviours, etc., within somebody's own home environment. Nursing homes are great big places, there's room to wander, etc. But people with dementia can be managed in their own homes if they've got the right input. And I think, you know, we need to be using the knowledge and expertise that lies within our nursing homes at the moment to provide that kind of, you know, link into the community support that might be on offer.
Thank you very much. Viv Dickens.
Yeah, I would agree with both Joanna and Cassie on that, and I think the availability of support is critical in this. I know of numbers of people who have not been able to get the support that they've needed at the point that they've needed it. So you can see a potential crisis looming with an older person. You can go to a local authority, you can agree a support package, but actually often then they say, well, you're going to have to wait because actually we don't have carers available in this area at the moment. The family then have to make a choice about whether they're going to fund that privately or not. And then if it goes to the point of crisis, they can't afford to fund it privately. I think that's probably one of the things that precipitates an earlier journey into a care home than necessary. The Life Changes Trust have done quite a bit of work on dementia-friendly communities, and I agree with Cassie. I think that people can live very independently and very happily in the community for a long time with dementia. So there's probably a couple of things to do there, is to build on the work of the Life Changes Trust and that dementia-friendly communities work, but also to do something about the destigmatisation of dementia, which I think still exists in our communities, and I think that's probably quite a big conversation still to have.
Thank you very much. I'll now come to Donald Cameron, and then after Donald I'll come in due course to Brian Whittle. Donald Cameron.
Thank you, Convener, and good morning to the panel. It's great to see and hear from you today. My question is a more overarching one about integration, and I just wondered if each of the panel members could give a very frank health check what they think of integration, given we've had it now for 5 or 6 years, how they think it's working, and particularly, I suppose, with COVID, in the last 9 months, how it has withstood the stresses and strains that has put on the system.
Liv Dickinson.
Our experience of integration has been pretty mixed. I think that something about the value of social care has got lost in the middle of integration. My sense is that we're getting quite a health-led approach in a lot of areas, and I see that coming down in a number of ways to our staff principally, who are being directed to care in a much more clinical way than they had previously done so. I think that's tricky. I think integration, it should be about that whole holistic support, getting medical support to people when they need medical support, but recognising that people are people and not patients, and that even when they're living in challenging circumstances and have disabilities, that the primary importance is to treat them as people and to give them as much choice and control as possible. So I think that integration has stalled a bit. I don't think it's delivered what we had hoped it would from the start. I think it's still got a bit of a journey to go, but I think it still holds the key to that holistic approach if we could get the implementation right across the board.
Thank you. Cassie Hershey.
I totally agree with Liv. I think she's been a little too kind. I worked in social work and commissioning before nursing home management. I know what the health and social care integration was supposed to be. I don't think it's happened, and I think we are all now still operating as very separate entities, and that agenda needs to be revisited.
Thank you very much. Joanna MacDonald.
I think it's a mixed picture, and in Argyll and Bute, for example, as part of integration, we've got adult, children's services, community justice, all in the health and social care partnership, which has meant, and again, particularly over the last 8 months, we've been able to be more flexible, working with our communities differently, because we've had all of health and social care in, including acute and the commission with Glasgow. I think it's probably fair to say that during COVID, the health aspect, understandably, it's a pandemic, but the health aspect, the profile of health has risen, and again, it goes back to what I said earlier. I'm not sure if there is a complete understanding of the role of social work and social care. Some of the best work that we saw that during COVID in particular was actually where people didn't have any direct care and support services, but they were being supported during the pandemic with mental health services, with children and family social workers and adult social workers, supporting them through the real concern and isolation that they experienced during COVID. So I think there's a lot of work to do. I suppose for me, integration links in with the self-directed support legislation, and how we're really protecting and promoting the rights of the majority of our communities who still live in their own communities. They don't live in a care home or a hospital. The majority of people live in their communities, but I think that profile in community hasn't been there. And I suppose just to add to that, around the care homes in particular, when, and I know it was very much from a supportive measure, and we really welcomed it in Argyll and Bute, when the Director of Public Health and Director of Nursing were asked to come in, there was that initial feeling of, so almost, what have we done wrong and what do we need to do differently? And we all recognised about improvement, but I think that when it came in very quickly, and it did feel like, well, from a chief social work officer perspective, perhaps you need that additional support to manage care homes and to make sure that you manage them through the pandemic. Our care homes, as well, as Cassie has said, they are the homes of individuals. That is where they live, and they should be able to have things like carpets and opportunities and friends. And during the pandemic, for me, those people living in care homes have been brilliantly supported by the staff there, but have probably been most vulnerable in relation to prohibiting friends and family to access. And we're now in a situation where a number of people families and friends are anxious to visit, even if they can visit care homes. And the staff as well they've just been outstanding during the pandemic.
Thank you very much. Donald Cameron.
For those very frank answers, which are much appreciated. I mean, looking forward, one of the things that the committee is considering is the prospect of a national care service, which in some regards seems to me to be, if not reversing the process of integration, at least encouraging us to think of the health service and the care service, if I could put it like that, as separate entities. I just wondered what your views are on that, whether you have any reflections, and whether you would like to see the process of integration actually continuing, being sped up, and what you generally felt about the future.
Thank you very much. I wonder if Cassie Hershey might want to go first. Cassie.
I mean, the idea of a national care service was probably first mooted in the early 70s, late 60s, because I go back that far. And I think it's a brilliant idea, but it will be a huge amount of funding. And what we have to be careful of if we went down that road is that we don't lose the expertise that's already out there. We'll get rid of that, and now we've got a national care service, and we'll forget about all the good stuff that we've actually got going on at the moment, all the knowledge, all the skills. The knowledge and the skills that we've got now has to be at the forefront of developing any national care service, and the funding has to be there. The funding isn't there, it won't work.
Yeah, resources. Joanna MacDonald.
Yeah, just to agree with Cassie, actually, when the 68 Act came in, I think there was moves then around the National Care Service. I suppose for me, I do think that national overview and oversight is really important, and I think that would be welcomed. I suppose for me, around commissioning and local authorities' roles and responsibilities around commission, I wouldn't want to see them completely. Although I manage an HSCP, I wouldn't want to see that taken away from local authorities. But I do think for national providers, every year when they are negotiating with up to 31 different health and social care partnerships or 32 local authorities, and commissioning and being paid at different rates, that just seems inherently unfair and a huge amount of work for them to do. And as a chief officer, I probably spend too long on finance, if that's the right way of phrasing it, because I spend an awful lot of my time on finance, and we're already looking at what is next year's budget going to be, and that 1 year funding, I think it doesn't help us either around innovation and around working differently. So I think a national overview and that national care service, what that might look like as an overview, would be welcome, but I would hate to see the expertise and skills within the voluntary sector and the private sector, I suppose, not welcomed into that fold.
Thank you. Viv.
Yeah, I'd like to know a bit more about the National Care Service, because I don't really think that we've had a definition of what that looks like yet, and therefore I'd probably be more able to comment. But I do agree with Joanna. I think there are some benefits to doing things nationally, and I think there would be some challenges to that. So benefits, absolutely, in terms of national collective bargaining for the staff, kind of looking at the conditions under the staff are wonderful. Social care staff, as you heard last week, there were lots of talks about the processes and the systems, but a universal, I think, regard for the way in which people are supported. And it's right that we look after the staff and value the staff. If we don't do that, we don't get it right for supported people. So actually thinking about, the living wage, the implementation of living wage as not having to negotiate with local authorities 32 times over, what the terms and conditions are going to be for staff, or whether we're going to be able to implement them in the provision that we get from them would absolutely benefit. I think there's probably something about staff training which would benefit from that overview, effective voice for a workforce potentially within a national care service. I would be worried that we go down pathways for support that become homogenous, that people don't have as much choice in that. So I think these are the things, the barriers that would really have to be overcome in that. And I wonder how it sits with the principles of self-directed support, a national care service. So these are some of the kind of questions that I have about it. And because I haven't seen anything really outlining the principles, it's a bit tricky to comment. But I think it provides as many challenges as it does opportunities.
Thank you very much. And I think Joanna wanted to come back in.
Yes, I suppose just coming back in on integration and the National Care Service, as a chief officer, it's really difficult. Again, when we get to commissioning and looking at our next year's budget, to see differences nationally in relation to how healthcare staff are valued and social care staff. And as a chief officer, because I'm managing health and social care staff, I've got 1,500 health staff, I've got 770 social care staff as well as services I'm commissioning. It is really difficult when there's going to proposals around protection for healthcare staff salary and that protection not being in place for social care. And I think we've got a real opportunity in Scotland to possibly stand above that. But I think that whenever we try to integrate and really say you're all equal, you're all valued, I think things like wages, salaries, negotiations nationally, clapping for NHS and not clapping for social care, I think with they're the right intentions, all of these things, but actually can make the social care sector feel devalued, I'm afraid.
I think you've opened up an important line of thought, and I want to hear again from Cassie and then from Viv again. Cassie.
Yeah, Joanna, you've hit my bugbear on the head. And as a trained nurse who trained in the NHS, who's worked in the acute sector in the NHS for years, to then move into nursing home management and into care in nursing homes, and I feel like a second-class citizen. And I think most of my nursing colleagues would agree. Our role within dementia care, which to me is so important and so valuable, is actually not perceived in the wider population as being as important as the frontline nurse in A&E. And it's demoralising. Our pay is less because the funding isn't there, and our esteem needs to be given back to us. Because it's very much been taken away, and it's been really highlighted throughout COVID when the NHS have very little contact with us normally. The most contact we would have would be a resident is admitted with a hip fracture and they're on the phone to us within 12 hours saying, can you take him back? We can't cope with him. That's the normal amount of contact we would get from the NHS. And now suddenly during COVID, they're throwing all this information at us as though they're experts suddenly in dementia care and what you should be doing, and telling us to do things which we know aren't possible, like isolate people with really challenging behaviour in their rooms, and treating us like we don't know what we're talking about. And we do. We're as qualified as any of your NHS staff. And that perception of nursing and caring in a care home needs to change radically, because otherwise you're not going to attract nurses and you're not going to attract good care staff to the care homes because of the perception that it's somehow second class.
Thank you very much. That sounds like something we should all be dedicating our efforts to change, and that's one of the things I'm sure the committee will want to draw some conclusions on. Viv.
We have 17 care homes, but it's not just a I think in the care homes where social care staff feel undervalued. And if you go to the Fair Work report, you'll see that that's something that runs through the heart of that. People's social care staff reporting that they often feel very valued by their organisation and by the individuals they support, but not at all by society, because on the whole society doesn't understand what social care is about. So there are some recommendations in the Fair Work report, and I'm sure the committee are aware of them about that. I agree, Cassie. I think social care staff are highly trained, highly skilled and highly experienced, but they are not well paid and they are not well recognised. And they're not actually well protected either by terms and conditions. But if you even go to the coronavirus legislation, where you saw health hospitals protected from decisions they took in terms of coronavirus deaths and the way that they work with coronavirus in hospitals, that hasn't been extended into social care, and it certainly hasn't been extended into care homes. And so you've got care home managers absolutely terrified at the moment about the thought of prosecution across the country. So even on these grounds alone, you can see the inequality that exists. That makes integration hard. It makes the lives of care staff very hard. Yeah, it would be great to see the committee spending some time and energy on thinking how we can get things right for staff, not both on the front line and for progression. I mean, the differentials have been squeezed for care staff. You know, who in their right mind would actually progress at the moment through to take massive of responsibility in a care home or anywhere else? I take my hats off to them every day, those that do. But the conditions under which they work, I think, are really, really tough. And that came, I think, a bit more recognition of that in the pandemic, but I'm frightened that it will go again just as quickly, and I think time is of the essence in tackling some of these things.
Thank you very much. And I move now to Brian Whittle.
Thank you, Gavina. Good morning to the panel. I was going to ask around the idea of innovation and flexibility, which the pandemic has kind of highlighted. I was really struck by a comment by Eddie Fraser when he stressed the importance of inclusion of the activities and intergenerational activities, and the absence of these opportunities has had a profound effect during the pandemic. So can I start off by asking that we understand, it seems obvious that during the pandemic it will lead to a greater incentive to innovate and be creative. And since we've got Viv Dickinson on the call, I wanted to highlight the work at Morgan Day Centre in Kilmarnock as a mental health drop-in centre. Of course, that relies on people, that integration, and of course they've not been able to do that during the pandemic, so have had to find other ways to communicate. So I wonder if the panel can maybe start off by maybe giving us some examples of how the pandemic has driven this innovation.
Viv, would you like to start?
Absolutely. I think there were two pivotal things for us, I think, throughout the pandemic, and that's been keeping people protected and connected. So absolutely, protection is really, really important. We wanted to keep all of our valuable people as safe as possible, but we did recognise that actually for many of them that would be challenging because it would mean isolation. So we have worked to just take everything as digitally as we possibly can. That's what we've done at Morven Day Services. We've put informal supports in. We've been feeding communities from our schools, working with very vulnerable families. We've put iPads and digital devices in every care home so that we can keep people connected with their families as much as possible. All our counselling services have gone online, but the staff have been remarkable, I think, in responding to the needs of individuals and innovating as far as possible. And Joanna talked a bit bit about that as well. Community-led through voluntary sector and through community councils support has been wonderful to see that reaching out, and it would be great to think that we could continue to work. The constraints were moved. Suddenly the commissioning barriers were moved a bit, and instead of saying to people, you need 15 minutes support to do this, it was much more important to make sure that their well-being was totally being looked after. And I think we've learned a lesson about removing some of the barriers that standard commissioning has in place, and actually working with people to support them in the best way possible.
Thank you. Cassie.
And within the nursing home, we've obviously been very locked down because we have very vulnerable people. But, you know, where possible, we've utilised IT systems. So, you know, there's been FaceTime with families and everything. But there is a sector within our nursing home who have really missed out. And they are the people with really advanced Alzheimer's disease or types of dementia where technology is too much for them. iPads, FaceTime, it's too confusing for them. And what they really wanted was just somebody who they knew, who was familiar to them, to just hold their hand. And that's not been possible.
Yeah. Joanna.
Yeah, just to, I suppose, add to what Cassie and Vivis said. So during COVID, I've heard the most heartening and also heartbreaking stories of not feeling connected, and the longer that we have got restrictions in place, the harder it is for families. Initially in lockdown, our experience was a number of families didn't want to have social care coming in to provide their support, wanted to do that by themselves, and we were working with them really to encourage them to continue to have social care. But for many of them now, particularly those with caring responsibilities, really struggling. And you know, I heard from a number of people who, because there was a gap between them being able to visit their loved one in a care home, particularly husbands and wives, that gap meant that when they did make their first visit, and they'd been trying to do it virtually, but when they did make their first visit, the person didn't recognise them, and trying to rebuild the relationship with them again, and then there'd be further restrictions. And I think we really felt that in Argyll and Bute, probably as much as anywhere else, because South Argyll and Bute borders on Greater Glasgow and Clyde, so where the numbers are significantly greater than here in Argyll and Bute. And I think that heartbreaking story of love and relationships, which underpins what social care is about, I think probably hasn't really been discussed publicly enough from my perspective. But I think the heartening story about our staff have been absolutely incredible, particularly our care home staff, who have had such a spotlight on them for many months, and cared about the people who passed away in their care homes. Our care home staff often are families and surrogate families for our residents, so I do think there's been heartening around the innovation, but heartbreaking as well around the impact of the pandemic.
Brian Whittle.
Panel, for those answers, there are a couple of things that pop out of there for me around the barriers or the constraints being removed, and if that's go, how do we continue that innovation to improve the things that we've done? What lessons can we learn from the creativity that's been really forced upon the sector by the pandemic? And secondly, following on probably from what said latterly, there's how do we ensure that sort of fragile, crucial services are brought back and can get up and running again post COVID? How are we set up to do that?
Joanna MacDonald.
I think we've spoken about health and social care services being different and the value of health. One of the things when the pandemic came in was about the removal of barriers. So if you are going to doctor, you get a prescription, you will get that medication straight away. If you're looking for social care, it is common that you'll have an assessment, quite a complex assessment, and you may have to wait for funding to be agreed, and actually even when funding is agreed, you might not have that resource. So there are differences in that universal services that are provided there. So I do think that innovation and being able at the beginning of COVID to safeguard people, because we were are going through a pandemic, to not be questioning around the cost of the social care, because this was about keeping people safe, was really, really invaluable and really helped across Scotland, and certainly here in Argyll and Bute, as move away from it being a complex process, and we've built in quite complex assessment and funding allocation processes within social care. We moved away from that to it being, what does that person need now to keep them safe? That applied to PPE, applied to their social care needs and their support there. So I think that was huge, and again, we're trying to continue with that. But as I mentioned earlier on, it's really difficult when we're now looking at next year's budget and potentially, well, the reality around funding for social care may not be what we need it to be. And that was so refreshing, and it really did put social care in a level playing field with health services, to be able to assess someone during the pandemic and provide that service straight away if we have the staff, but to be able to provide that without focusing first on the finances. And I think the financial process has become too dominant within social care services, but we don't see that in health services. As I say, you go to doctor, you get a prescription, no one questions how much that costs, and you get that prescription. So that's me.
Thank you. Cassie, would you like to add anything on that?
I mean, only you know, again, I sound like a long playing record, but it comes back to resources and funding. And for as long as we have, I mean, the situation in my home is that basically we have some private residents, most of them are NHS funded, but it's the private residents that are supplementing the care that the NHS funded ones get. And the amounts that we're receiving to support these people is insufficient. And I think that's been highlighted throughout COVID.
Thank you. Viv.
I mean, removing the barriers is a really interesting question, and Joanna spoke to it very well there. I mean, really, I think what happened in our case as a very large voluntary sector provider is that they just said, get on with it. You know, do what you can, support people as best you can, find ways of keeping them connected, and we've stopped competitive tendering throughout this, so that's not been there, and I think that's been a huge support. It has taken a level of uncertainty out of the social care field, and that's something I think that we could all learn from. Actually, is there something better that we can do than the competitive tendering? I'm concerned that that's all about to start again, and we have seen some signs of that. But also looking at funding more holistically, you know, what we have been freed up from doing is not doing these packages, not treating people as packages, you can have this or you can have that, but actually being able to say what is most important to you at this time in your life in the middle of a global pandemic and deliver that. And that's been incredibly refreshing, I think, and working alongside families where we can in order to make sure that things are rationalised and make sense. So it really has been good. That whole issue of the care home contract is, of course, an important one that Cassie's raised there. I don't know that will change as a result of coronavirus, but it needs to be very carefully thought about. I think what's happening in the third sector is we're being pushed to developing a more commercial model in terms of having to take more and more private clients to balance the national care home contract, and I've already raised with government that I don't think that that's a place that you should be pushing your voluntary sector to. We should be there to be able to support people regardless of their ability to pay or whether they come in under the national care home contract or not. So I think that is material to the longer term discussion, but potentially not sitting in the middle of the conversation about how we can remove barriers to care for the future.
Thank you very much, and I certainly want to address some of these issues too. I'll come back to Brian Whittle, and then I'll come over to Emma Harper after that. Brian Whittle.
Thank you, Kevin. I'll just finish my line of questioning if I could do this one. I mean, Joanna, you highlighted very much how the system is complex. You're working in a sector that's very highly regulated, and how do we balance that with this introduction of sort of creativity, if you like, innovation and fairness, to specifically from between local authorities and providers. It just seems a bit of a, it's quite a conflict that when you have something to try and put innovation and creativity into such a highly regulated system.
Joanna MacDonald.
Said is that social care is a very highly regulated system, and I think that's a huge advantage we've got, that we recognised at the beginning of COVID that the staff who work in social care are registered with the Scottish Social Services Council. The services that are delivered in the main are overseen by the Care Inspectorate, and we can put a level of trust in the delivery of these services because of the overview that is already in place there. So I think it is really complex at the moment, and it's complex within the system, so I think that really makes it difficult for the public to understand as well. And going through that process of social care assessment and that feeling of you have to, not entitlement's the wrong word, but really that feeling of you have to evidence why you need that care and support in a way that will often be then reviewed by others before funding is allocated to you. I think it's just not respecting our value, and particularly our older population, but our vulnerable population who have got less of a voice a lot of the time than those who don't have care needs. So I think there's work the Scottish Government could do, there's work nationally we could be doing around that. And I think part of that also is work around, so what are the performance indicators that are looked at nationally? And if we look at the performance indicators, we'll see a lot around hospital discharges, A&E performance, and we'll see very little investment actually in comparison around social care. So I think to understand social care, it needs to be all of us stepping up and taking that responsibility to articulate what social care is and to articulate what it does. And as I said earlier, that spotlight that's on social care at the moment is really valued, and the fact that everyone's looking at it is really valued. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Emma Harper.
Thanks, Convener. It's just to come in on in our papers, our briefing, there's the word Bert-Zorg model, and I'm interested in whether health and social care partnerships are looking at home teams or other team models to engage. I know that Dumfries and Galloway have developed a home teams type model, but in reading about Bert-Zorg, it says it's a pioneering healthcare organisation established 13 years ago with a nurse-led model of holistic care that revolutionised community care in the Netherlands. And it gives some statistics about how staffing is basically funded at the ground, and they've made some substantial savings in delivering care. And there's another model in East Lothian called LCAP, which is looking at self-managing teams to create much leaner management structures. So I'm interested in whether the witnesses have any experience or knowledge about developing self-management teams, for instance, looking at the Bert-Zorg model.
Thanks very much, Emma, and I would encourage witnesses, by all means, address Bert-Zorg if it's something you're familiar with, but also some of the more general points that come out of that and some of the different approaches that Emma's highlighted. Viv.
Yeah, it's something that we've looked at with self-managing teams, particularly in our community services. We've had some hesitation about how it works in terms of regulation. I think there's quite a lot of work to do to both unpack the regulations around, or the registrations of staff and the regulation that sits over health and social care to develop that sort of model further. But it's certainly of interest, and I think it pushes power down as far as possible in terms of brokering the relationship between the individual and the person supporting them, and allowing the people who support them to do that in the best way possible. So I think that there's a lot in there. There are other models. We are part of an alliancing model in Glasgow at the moment. So there are other things around there, I think, that are worth exploring in terms of alternative ways of commissioning. But I think at the heart of them all, whether that's Birdsong or alliancing or anything else, it's about collaboration. And I think collaborative commissioning, working collaboratively with our commissioning partners, ourselves in the third or independent sectors, and supported people, is going to be something that we could do much better for the future.
Thank you. Joanna MacDonald.
Yes, I think going back to integration, Birdsong and neighbourhood ways of working has been a huge strength of integration. So bringing our health and social care staff together, particularly around older people, working with communities, within communities, and a nurse-led model is now in place across many parts of Scotland. In Inverness, they've got fantastic neighbourhood teams across the whole of Inverness that provide that 24/7 community support. And here in Argyll and Bute, it looks a little bit different because of our rurality, but again, we've got that neighbourhood team approach. So I think Birdsong and neighbourhood, as Viv has said there's different descriptions of very similar models, is a really empowering approach because, as you said there, it takes away from looking at whose budget do I need to spend on what. So my previous discussions around going through an adult social care assessment, to looking at the budget setting within the team, and it's definitely the way forward. The evidence from Holland is unquestionable, and they've been in place there, I think now for 9 years, the Birdsong teams in Holland. So it's certainly a model that in NHS Highland and Argyll and Bute will certainly be really embracing that, and in other parts of Scotland as well.
Cathy?
No, I don't think I have a lot to offer to that. I mean, that it just occurred to me listening to you that it reflects actually some of the models that are used in the acute NHS centre services, such as midwife-led units, that kind of thing. So I can see the value in it, and yeah, sounds great. Where do I sign?
Very good. Emma.
Convener.
Sorry, you're done. Yep. Yep. Thanks very much. What can I ask about questions of access and what it is that perhaps needs to be done in communities to ensure that people are able to have access if they're living independently in the community? I wonder if our witnesses have thoughts on those issues. Joanna?
Yeah, so for us here in Argyll and Bute, we've been working hugely on access prior to COVID, but more so during COVID, as we've had a greater understanding of who are the more vulnerable people living alone in the communities, which we didn't know in the same way before COVID. But when we were looking at meals and prescriptions, collections, etc., it's really given us a level of understanding of our communities. And I suppose it probably goes back to an earlier point about how we get that public messaging out there, that resources and services are there and they're there to support people when they need them at the earliest possible stage. That many people aren't accessing that support until they feel that they really need it. And I think with COVID, it was a real leveller, because COVID, we all had to be in lockdown, remain in our own homes, unless it was absolutely necessary. It was a real leveller in relation to access to food parcels, access to support, access to phone lines around loneliness. And I think that leveller was a real opportunity as well, that, as I say, we're building on here in Argyll and Bute, but we've got a long way to go, because the access to service means that you need to understand what support's out there, and you need to also believe that you can expect that it's your right to have that support when you need it. And I don't think we're there yet in relation to our communities and our societies.
Okay, thank you. Sandra White, I think, wanted to come in.
Very much, Convener. Thank you, Convener. Can I just thank the witnesses? I think it's been an excellent session, and I did have a couple of questions, but you've answered them, and it's been very, very good. But the one issue I wanted to raise on the access issue, yes, the information is out there, but it's getting it out to people. But I think on the situation with dementia, I just wonder, how you feel about this. It's sometimes very difficult, even though the information's there, that some of the families have not quite came to terms with a dementia issue. And when they read the articles, etc., they get a bit worried about the fact that perhaps their loved one will be taken into care. But I think in dementia, and I just wonder if you agree with me here, on the issue of dementia and Alzheimer's, that it's more difficult to explain that they don't want to take the person away. They want to give as much help as possible. So I just wonder how we get round that, particularly as has been mentioned in regards to care homes where they don't necessarily have to be there. I think it's just a very careful way of putting it across. It's a very delicate subject, because I know from experience that people sometimes have not came to terms with it enough, and they don't really want to come to terms with it, families, etc.
Sure. Cassie.
It's a society thing that there's a fear of dementia. People forget, or people don't actually recognise a lot of the time. It's a disease. It's like having leukemia. It's a disease. It's a terminal disease, but it's a disease, and that has increased the fear for some people. There's a lack of understanding in other areas, and it's about changing society's perception of what dementia is, how it affects individuals. Not everybody's going to go to a really advanced stage where, the behaviours are really unmanageable. Not everybody's going to become incontinent. It's getting people. There isn't enough knowledge out there in society that people genuinely understand what dementia is. It's fear.
Yeah. Viv?
Yeah, absolutely, Cassie, and I think there's also stigma. I think there's still stigma exists. I think stigma exists, but not just for people with dementia. I think for numbers of people who are supported, and I think that goes partly to funding. I think it goes partly to culture. So if we see people as vulnerable, we classify them in a certain way, and sometimes that can lead us to think that they are coming under some sort of scrutiny. Do you want interference in your life? Do you not? Is it a service? Is it going to be more of a barrier to you living your life in the way that you do? So I think we've got a tricky in language there. If you see people as valuable and living with a challenge, you're much more likely, I think, to invest and to think that they can live their best life. So I think it kind of goes to the heart of what we're talking about here, and we use very openly the term vulnerable people. And we get scared, I think, about what services mean in our lives, and I think it's genuinely about turning that dialogue around, about seeing all people as valuable, about seeing all people having the right to a normal life. And if you need a bit of support to do that, just as you might need a bit of medical support to do that, then needing some social support to do that too should not be stigmatising. It should be just normalising, and yet somehow, and I think dementia's one of these things that are very stigmatised, but there are others. There are other mental health issues around where I think people feel incredibly stigmatised and frightened to ask for services in their lives, and I think that goes the same for some families struggling with poverty. That we've really got a bit of a difficulty in the society we've created, which recognises people's vulnerabilities but doesn't see the value necessarily in supporting them in a holistic way. So that would be my throw in at this moment.
Thank you. And Cassie, I think you wanted to come back.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to totally agree with Viv that, the stigma in society, but that's not something, that's not recent, that's always been there. I come from generations of psychiatric nurses many years down the line. That stigma has always been there, and it's incumbent on us to actually do something about it, and that comes through knowledge and education and understanding.
Thank you very much. Joanna.
area where certainly I've really welcomed the government investment in that post-diagnostic period, that 1 year after someone has a diagnosis with dementia, them having expert support, and additional staffing and funding was put in place a number of years ago for that. And I think that has been really invaluable in having that one person to support the person during that post-diagnostic phase. It is incredibly complex, particularly for couples or families who've been together for many, many years, to actually accept in the first instance that there may be dementia. It's a story of grief as well, when that you start to see the signs that someone may not be remembering everything in the same way. And that post-diagnostic support for that 1 year around practical things, around benefits, around just being that named person, I think has been invaluable, and I've personally seen it in Highland and in Argyll and Bute, and just continue to see that value. I do think, as Viv and Cassie have said around dementia, it's hidden an awful lot of the time. And families are living in our communities and managing their loved ones in the most incredible ways, but it is very hidden, and people are entitled to their right to privacy. But in dealing with this as a whole system approach, I think the profile of dementia is a difficult one to continue to raise the profile, which is what we're all trying to do, when so much of it's hidden within communities, and actually so much of it we're not even connected with from a health or social care perspective, because families are just getting on and supporting their loved ones until it becomes a crisis, as Cassie mentioned earlier on.
Thanks very much. Sandra, did you want to come back at all?
I want to thank the witnesses. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can I ask a question then about, David Stewart explored the issue of consultation. What about involving people more in commissioning and design of services, so that families or receivers of care are involved in that, and perhaps also in designing preventive services? Is there something there the committee should focus on? Something there the government should be thinking about in terms of that kind of engagement? Joanna.
One of the strengths of integrated joint boards is that they have got carers, representatives and others on the boards, participating in all of the discussions and decision making around how the partnerships are working. The carers don't have the same voting rights, which I think from an equality perspective, there's a view that means they're not sitting there in the same terms and conditions, and it does come up for us occasionally. But I do think the fact that they are sitting there helping us with our strategic plans, informing that, is really, really important. And in relation to our strategic plan here in Argyll and Bute, we've now got that co-chaired. Third sector interface are involved in that, and we've got that co-chaired to make sure that it's really reflective of that ambition of integration, which is about empowering our communities and connecting our communities.
Thank you very much. Can I ask one final question to all our witnesses? If none of our other members have any further questions they want to explore, can I come back and ask each of you in summary, in a couple of sentences? We're talking about reform or change to the social care system. The Scottish Government is reviewing the social care system with the same outcome in mind, and we've talked about some of those important issues today. If there was one thing you would want us to take away, or one thing you would want government to focus on in terms of the future of social care in Scotland, what would it be? Can I ask Viv, first of all, to kick us off?
Sure. I think it's about value. So there's all sorts of things that you can do underneath that, but valuing social care and seeing it for its distinct value, that allows you to see the value of supported people, to shift power, choice and control, accessibility. But it also allows you to value staff, and by implementing Fair Work policies for staff. So I think it's really about getting to the heart of the value, and then having everything fanning out from there.
Thank you very much. Joanna.
Viv actually took the words out of my mouth, so I would say it's the value and everything that underpins value. When we value something, we cherish it, we invest energies in it, we care for it. And I think media discussions, I'm going to come back to finance, I'm afraid, but media discussions around and comments such as record investments in health services and spiralling costs of adult social care, when actually they're both about investing. That sort of media attention does not value adult social care. It brings it down to pounds and pennies, which are essential. But it's the relationships in social care and care homes and communities, not just between our staff and the people that they're paid to support, but actually the families that they are connecting with each other, and that's real value. Viv articulated it better, but for me it's about value in social care.
Thank you very much. And for the last word in this session, Cassie Hersey.
Yeah, and they both articulated it better than I will be able to, but yeah, absolutely. I value what I do. I need you to value me for what we're doing. You know, it's a privilege to do my job. I totally recognise the need for change. There does need to be change. Please, Scottish Government, don't go away and decide these are the changes you're going to put in place. You need to involve us. We know we're the experts in this. You need to continue. I recognise that that's what you're doing today, but you need to continue to include us in your discussions in the future.
Thank you very much, and we will certainly, as a parliamentary committee, want to continue our dialogue with the government as well in order to ensure the voices of carers and those providing care in our social care sector are heard loud and clear. Can I thank all our witnesses today for what's been a very stimulating, very wide-ranging session and very informative, and it will certainly feed into our consideration going forward. So thank you again for your time and your contributions. Much appreciated. The committee will now move into private session. I will now suspend this meeting. We will resume in 5 minutes' time on a different platform at 11:50. Thank you very much.